No grand address, royal declaration, or open broadcast signaled the impending storm. Instead, the crisis erupted within a quiet portrait studio, amid pre-arranged seating and finalized lighting grids, where Charles waited for the cameras to roll. A single directive threw everything into chaos. Camilla's presence beside him was cancelled. Sophie would take that spot. Before we unravel the deeper shockwaves this sent through the palace, tap that subscribe button to keep up with every royal development. Initially, the monarch remained seated. His hand rested heavily on the vacant chair next to him, as though the empty space carried a physical weight he could not push aside. The courtier who delivered the news spoke in hushed tones, yet the message struck like a physical blow. This formal photography session, historically crafted to project solidarity, authority, and national trust, had been rewritten moments before the sovereign arrived. Sophie was chosen to stand at his side, while Camilla was completely erased from the composition. That minor adjustment transformed a routine photo op into a monumental tectonic shift. After all, royal portraits are never mere imagery. They are silent maps showing who holds the ultimate proximity to the throne. But what happened when the three individuals involved finally faced this sudden change? Camilla stood frozen in the hallway. Having prepared meticulously for the session, she had walked toward the studio fully expecting to occupy her rightful position next to the king. Then came a paralyzing silence. Nobody would look her in the eye. A staff member quietly closed a folder, while another backed away. The queen consort realized the truth before any official dared to voice it. This was no scheduling conflict. This was an outright eviction. And because this portrait was supposed to project absolute peace after weeks of internal family friction, her sudden absence would shout louder than any caption. When Sophie stepped in, she showed no sign of triumph. There was no look of a victor on her face. Pale, measured, and hyper-aware, she knew each step toward Charles carried immense political gravity. This dependable confidant had spent years cultivating an image of quiet loyalty and restraint. Yet that very silence had now pushed her into the most exposed spot of all, standing directly where Camilla believed she belonged. Charles cast a brief glance at her, then stared at the void left beside him. He understood the public would dissect this photograph. He knew the pain this would cause his wife. Yet he also understood this was no erratic decision. A chilling truth filled the room. The swap had been finalized long before they arrived. Someone had already calculated that Sophie's image served the throne far better than Camilla's. Loyalty had been weighed against symbolism, and composure won. While Charles felt the crushing weight of that choice in silence, Camilla faced it behind a closed door she never expected to have shut on her. Yet, before the palace could manage the fallout, the true storm was brewing between the people trapped inside this frame. A royal portrait is never just a photo, it is a permanent political statement. At this precise moment, three individuals brought three distinct scars into a single room. Charles bore the heavy crown. Camilla carried the sting of public sidelining. And Sophie faced the quiet dread of being thrust into a spotlight she had never actively sought. The king recognized the danger instantly. A single picture can steady a nation, reassure a household, and project an image of an unshakable monarchy. But that same picture can expose a fracture that no press release can mend. Having lived his life knowing the crown survives on symbols, Charles watched the symbol before him shatter. Camilla's spot was gone, Sophie's was locked in. This was not a minor seating change, it was an emotional eviction. Camilla handled the embarrassment with cold discipline. She did not scream or demand an immediate explanation. She simply withdrew to an adjacent room, slowly sliding off one glove, using the small physical act to keep her composure intact. The queen consort had survived decades of public hostility and distance. But this cut deeper because it was delivered by the very institution she had fought so hard to join. Being erased from the portrait meant being written out of the dynasty's modern story. For Camilla, that was the ultimate cruelty. She had lost more than a physical space next to Charles, she had lost her air of permanence. Sophie felt no joy in her promotion. Her flawless record of discretion and duty made her the safest symbolic option for senior advisors, but safety is a heavy crown to wear. She knew why her presence carried weight, she had never self-promoted or let personal feelings disrupt her duty. Yet, as she prepared to step into Camilla's place, the confidant understood the cost. Her elevation was built directly on another woman's public shame. Then came the question Sophie asked, one that nobody wanted to answer directly: did Charles sign off on this? The response was delivered with agonizing diplomacy. The king had been briefed, but the final order came directly from the official portrait committee. It was a perfectly polished sentence, designed to shield everyone while wounding everyone. Charles heard the cold detachment, Camilla felt it as abandonment, Sophie saw it as a warning. The decision carried official weight, but no one wanted to claim the cruelty behind it. That calculated phrasing changed the entire atmosphere. It proved this swap was no sudden emotional whim, but the result of a deeper, pre-planned strategy. Someone had decided Sophie's stability outweighed Camilla's status. Someone decided the image needed discipline over comfort. But what spark had ignited this clinical execution? To find out, we have to look back at Windsor. To grasp why Sophie was placed next to the king, we must return to the exact moment Camilla's position became untenable. Weeks before the silence fell over the portrait studio, there was another room, another gathering, and a single mistake the palace could not overlook. It occurred during a private investiture rehearsal at Windsor, where Camilla stepped forward ahead of Sophie, breaking the strict order of precedence in front of senior staff and leaving Charles visibly rattled. The king noticed the slip instantly. His face remained neutral, but those who had worked with him for years saw the sudden tension in his frame. The rehearsal, a highly controlled practice run where every step must respect centuries of hierarchy, relied entirely on precision. That order of precedence, the rigid ranking determining who walks first and who represents the throne, had been broken. Camilla's extra step was tiny, but the symbolic damage was massive. Once that tension filled the room, the rehearsal's rhythm was permanently broken. Sophie sensed the shift immediately, but her reaction was entirely different. She lowered her gaze and stepped back without a word, preserving dignity where any reaction could have escalated the situation. The confidant understood the stakes. A visible clash in that room would echo far beyond Windsor. Her silence was not submission, it was a calculated act of loyalty. Yet that very silence would later be remembered as absolute proof of her stability. Camilla moved forward as if nothing happened, never addressing it publicly. But the lack of an apology did not erase the mistake. Those who saw it carried the memory into every subsequent meeting. Advisors spoke with caution around her, briefing notes became guarded. Then, a highly confidential protocol document materialized. It labeled the event neutrally as a precedent disruption, a clinical phrase carrying immense institutional weight. That specific term began to shadow Camilla in every planning session, quietly shaping decisions long after the rehearsal ended. Charles read that document in private and knew exactly what it meant. It was not a punishment, it was a warning flag that institutional order had been shaken. In a monarchy built entirely on symbols, even a momentary lapse can alter destiny. That is why the portrait session became the ultimate venue for correction. Sophie's restraint transformed into institutional trust, while Camilla's forward step became the ultimate justification for her sidelining. When Camilla finally realized the portrait decision stemmed directly from that single Windsor slip, her confusion hardened into cold clarity. This was not an arbitrary replacement, it was a deliberate, unannounced correction. That realization did not calm her, it sharpened her anger. The buried incident had surfaced, and she refused to suffer the fallout in silence. The clash did not happen in public, but behind the closed doors of a private sitting room. Camilla entered first, tense but holding her head high. Sophie followed, quiet and defensive. Between them hung the portrait decision, no longer just a photo, but proof that the palace's trust had shifted. Camilla remained standing, using her posture as a shield against the tension. The queen consort had demanded this meeting herself, refusing to let the day proceed without an explanation. Outside, Charles waited with a lone advisor, deliberately keeping his distance. He knew entering the room would not fix the rift, it would only expose it, and exposure is fatal for a family built on controlled perception. Sophie felt the suffocating quiet. Once the door clicked shut, she did not look for an easy way out. The trusted confidant had built her life on restraint, and now that restraint was facing its ultimate test. She met Camilla's gaze without excuses, knowing these words would not stay in this room. Camilla spoke first, her voice steady but sharp. She told Sophie that the spot next to the king was never hers to occupy, not like this, and not under these circumstances. The words were quiet, but they packed the full weight of her humiliation. She did not accuse Sophie of plotting, that would have been too simple. Instead, she spoke as a woman displaced, forced to watch her own erasure become a public statement. Sophie responded with genuine sorrow, not anger. She explained she had never sought the role, and would have declined it if refusal were an option. That answer did not heal the wound, but it shifted Camilla's perspective entirely. In that moment, she realized something far more chilling than a personal rivalry. Sophie had not planned this. The power behind this move came from somewhere much larger, a system willing to reposition players without their consent. That realization settled heavily between them, turning anger into cold understanding. This mutual realization made the displacement feel even worse. If Sophie was not the mastermind, then the institution itself had decided Camilla was too great a risk. Then, the silence broke. Camilla stood up fully, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. It was a tiny sound, but it carried the weight of everything they could not say. She did not push the argument. She chose distance. With that, the meeting ended, leaving a question neither could solve. Camilla had confronted Sophie, but the real power lay far beyond both of them. Every royal maneuver has a visible actor and an invisible hand. Here, the actor was Sophie standing next to Charles. The invisible hand was a formal order circulating through the household, signed with absolute detachment, and delivered too late to challenge without projecting weakness. Charles did not react immediately when the folder arrived. He shut the door, dismissed his aide, and stood alone before opening it. That brief hesitation spoke volumes. It revealed a monarch who already knew what lay inside. When he finally sat down, the document's conclusion did not surprise him, but its cold precision did. This was no gentle suggestion. It was an official portrait directive, a formal instruction used to dictate positioning and symbolism in state imagery. Sophie's role had been meticulously plotted. The logic within the file was chillingly clear: the monarchy needed discipline, continuity, and a figure who projected calm without drama. Sophie's name was listed not as an alternative, but as the preferred stabilizing presence. That phrase haunted Charles. It did not strip Camilla of her title, but it made it clear her presence at this moment was a liability the crown could not afford. Charles set the document down. He did not call his staff back. He simply stared at the desk, feeling the immense weight of the choice. The king understood the political necessity, he knew how the Windsor incident had eroded internal trust. But logic did not ease the personal cost. Behind those cold lines was a devastating truth: his wife had become a complication in the royal narrative. A senior courtier observed Charles's reaction from a distance when he was finally let back in. He asked no questions, but saw the change on the king's face: not rage, but a heavy acceptance. Duty, once again, demanded silence. And silence, in this room, felt like betrayal. The most explosive truth lay in the wording: Camilla had not been cast out of the family, she had simply been erased from the picture. That distinction protected the crown while shifting the symbol. And in this family, symbols are everything. When the news reached Camilla's quarters, there were no raised voices, only a suffocating quiet. A silence that filled the hallways, cut conversations short, and left staff wondering what was safe to say. The decision was sealed, the studio prepared, and the household now had to face the reality. That reality sat quietly in a dressing room in the form of an empty chair. Camilla remained fully dressed for a portrait she would never join, her jewels fastened, her posture elegant, but her space already filled. For the first time, her sidelining had a schedule, a room, and witnesses. Camilla did not take off her jewelry. She sat perfectly still after the door closed, her hand resting on her bracelet, trying to anchor herself. The queen consort had faced public storms before, but this was an internal, calculated execution. It carried a weight she could not ignore. The message was clear: she was too unpredictable for the image the crown had to present. Outside, the palace machinery moved with flawless coordination. Courtiers quietly altered the official movement plan, the schedule managing where royals walk and stand, ensuring Camilla and Sophie would not cross paths. No announcements were made, staff simply shifted paths and lowered their voices. The royal routine went on, but tension hummed beneath the surface. Charles felt it build. He requested a 5-minute delay before entering the studio, a pause that spoke of deep internal conflict. Standing alone, he was torn between being a husband who felt his wife's isolation, and a king who knew the decision was necessary. That conflict did not fade, and when he finally entered, it was with heavy acceptance. In the studio, a tiny action sealed the deal. An aide quietly walked to the table and removed Camilla's name card. It was a swift, almost invisible act, but it was final. There would be no last-minute changes. Sophie saw it happen, and for a brief second, hesitation cracked her composure. She knew she was not stepping into a vacant space, she was stepping into an open wound. Yet the session went on. Charles stood next to Sophie, creating the exact image of stability the directive demanded, while beneath the surface, everything had changed. The official business seemed over until the studio cleared. Once the doors closed, the formal protocol fell away, leaving room for raw honesty. For a few brief moments, the royal machinery vanished, leaving only Charles and Sophie in a room built for history, both aware of the pain this image had caused. The king looked exhausted, not powerful. Sophie looked dutiful, not triumphant. Charles broke the silence first, his voice stripped of royal authority. He quietly confessed he never wanted this day to feel like a punishment. The words were heavy with regret. He did not make excuses for the directive, instead, he acknowledged the personal cost. Camilla's absence was a deeply personal wound. Sophie listened in silence, her expression perfectly controlled. The confidant understood what outsiders rarely do, that duty often demands silence when emotion demands a voice. She answered carefully, stating that loyalty does not always look like a reward. Sometimes it simply means standing exactly where you are placed, even when it brings pain instead of pride. She did not act deserving, she acted necessary. Charles absorbed her words, his expression shifting. He had seen this exact resilience before at Windsor, where her restraint saved the family from a public scene. That memory had shaped the very directive that brought them here. He admitted it plainly, her composure that day had become the ultimate evidence that under pressure, she would not crack. Sophie did not celebrate. Instead, she made a difficult request. She asked that Camilla not be publicly humiliated by how this was handled. She did not fight the decision, but pleaded that the final release would not turn a quiet sidelining into a public circus. The request hung in the air. Charles understood its importance. The palace could control the photo, but not how the public interpreted it. The conversation ended not with a victory, but with a quiet acceptance of the path ahead. Sophie had chosen grace inside, but outside the gates, the image struck like lightning. By the following morning, the palace had lost control of the narrative. The photo had reached newsstands, phone screens, and television screens across the nation. A single image became a massive public debate, and one missing figure screamed louder than any official statement. Charles had anticipated this the moment the photo was released. He knew how quickly a single visual could define a story. The official press release described the photo as a celebration of service and unity, but the visual alignment spoke for itself. Sophie was there, Camilla was not. Camilla viewed the papers in private, away from advisors. She did not call for help, she simply turned the page, using the simple gesture to maintain her dignity. The queen consort knew how to survive public storms, but this internal blow was different. Her silence became her armor, but it also spoke volumes. Sophie felt the public reaction as a burden. Every compliment she received carried an unspoken comparison to Camilla. She monitored the discussion closely, realizing the narrative had already escaped palace control. The public moment was cemented when a major London newspaper ran the portrait on its front page under the headline, "The Woman Beside the King," with a sidebar detailing Camilla's absence. It did what official words could not prevent, it turned speculation into absolute certainty. Outside the palace, crowds gathered, comparing the new photo to older royal arrangements on their phones. No official explanation was needed, the public had already made up its mind. Charles knew this impression would linger. Camilla carried it in silence, and Sophie bore it in her continued restraint. The portrait had marked a permanent shift. The public had judged the photo, but the deeper verdict fell on the institution itself. In the end, the portrait would be remembered not for Sophie's expression or Charles's posture, but because it laid bare the ultimate royal truth: love may build a family, but trust secures the crown. And on that day, trust was captured for the entire world to see. Alone in his study that evening, Charles stared at the finished photograph. He did not look at it as a husband, but as a monarch who knew how history would judge this moment. A royal portrait does not merely document history, it defines it. Sophie stood where stability was required, while Camilla's absence spoke of hidden tension. Charles saw both truths and knew his acceptance of this moment would be remembered as a choice of duty over personal comfort. Camilla felt that distance deeply. She did not seek further explanations. The queen consort now understood that while the institution would protect her title, it would not shield her privileges. Her wound remained, but she contained it, refusing to let her personal pain disrupt the royal structure. This clarity was cold, but absolute. Sophie moved forward without boasting, never seeking the spotlight. In a later interview recorded for the private royal archives, a highly confidential document meant strictly for internal history, the trusted confidant explained her position with quiet honesty. She stated she never desired the center, but simply tried to stand firm when others faltered. That statement did not celebrate her, it defined her. Within the palace, her presence next to Charles was seen as a triumph of discipline. Charles recognized that discipline as the foundation of his reign. Camilla recognized the boundaries it drew. Sophie accepted the burden it brought. Together, they defined the final meaning of the image. The crown had not acted out of malice, but out of correction, prioritizing structure over emotion. That was the ultimate truth. The monarchy had chosen survival over sentiment. And in that final frame, Sophie became the calm the crown desperately needed. That is why a single changed position next to King Charles became a historical turning point, the moment the palace showed exactly who it trusted to stand firm when the world went quiet. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you in our next video.